My name is Sarah Martinez, and for 28 years, I believed I was living the life my parents had always envisioned for me. I had graduated magna cum laude from Northwestern University, landed a prestigious job at a marketing firm in Chicago, married my college sweetheart David, and was living in a beautiful suburban home with a white picket fence and a golden retriever named Buddy. But life, as I was about to learn, has a way of shattering even the most carefully constructed facades. It was a crisp October morning when I discovered I was pregnant. Not just pregnant, pregnant with twins. David and I had been trying for over a year, and the news should have been pure joy. Instead, as I stared at the ultrasound image showing 2 tiny heartbeats, I felt a mixture of overwhelming happiness and paralyzing fear. Twins, Dr. Peterson said with a warm smile. Congratulations, Sarah. Everything looks healthy so far. David squeezed my hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. 2 babies, he whispered. We're having 2 babies. I should have been over the moon. Instead, a nagging worry gnawed at my chest. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated, built on a foundation of conditional love and impossibly high expectations. I was their only child, the one who was supposed to be perfect, successful, and never a burden. The word burden had been a constant in my childhood vocabulary. Don't be a burden, Sarah. We can't afford to support burdens. Good children aren't burdens to their parents. As I grew older, I learned to anticipate their needs, to be helpful rather than needy, to excel in everything so they would never have reason to call me that dreaded word again. It worked, for the most part. I became the daughter they bragged about to their friends, the one who never caused problems. But pregnancy, especially a high-risk twin pregnancy, would test those boundaries in ways I wasn't prepared for. When we called to share the news, my mother's first response wasn't congratulations. It was concern, not for my health or happiness, but for the inconvenience. Twins. Margaret Martinez's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Sarah, honey, you know how expensive that's going to be. 2 of everything. And the sleepless nights. Your father and I remember how difficult you were as a baby. Thanks for the support, Mom, I said, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. I'm just being realistic, dear. You'll need to start saving immediately. And you might want to consider whether David's salary can really support a family of 4. My father, Robert, chimed in from the background. Tell her she needs to make sure her maternity leave is properly arranged. Can't have her becoming a financial burden if something goes wrong. There it was. The word that had defined my relationship with them for as long as I could remember. David noticed my expression and gently took the phone. We're very excited, he told my parents firmly. Sarah's going to be an amazing mother. After we hung up, I sat in our kitchen staring at the ultrasound photos. David wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. They'll come around, he said softly. Once the babies are here, they'll fall in love just like we have. I wanted to believe him, but I knew my parents better than he did. Love, in the Martinez household, had always been conditional. I'd spent my entire life earning it through achievements, through being convenient, through never needing too much. The pregnancy progressed with typical complications for twins. Morning sickness that lasted well into my 2nd trimester. Fatigue that made my demanding job increasingly difficult. By month 6, I was on modified bed rest, which meant relying on others more than I'd ever been comfortable with. David was incredible, taking on extra household responsibilities without complaint. My friends from work brought meals and checked in regularly. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman whose own children lived across the country, became like a surrogate grandmother, stopping by with homemade soup and offering to run errands. But my parents, they were notably absent. I don't understand why you can't just push through it, my mother said during one of her increasingly rare phone calls. I worked right up until I went into labor with you. The doctor says bed rest is necessary, Mom. The babies are measuring small, and there are concerns about preterm labor. Well, I hope you're not expecting us to come babysit all the time once they're born. Your father and I have our own lives, you know. We're not built in childcare. I hadn't even asked. I'd learned long ago not to ask my parents for help unless I was truly desperate. As my due date approached, complications arose that would test every relationship in my life and reveal truths about my parents that I wasn't prepared to face. At 34 weeks, during a routine checkup, Dr. Peterson's expression grew serious as she studied the ultrasound monitor. "Sarah, I'm seeing some concerning signs. Baby A's growth has slowed significantly, and there are indicators of possible cord compression. I think we need to start discussing the possibility of an early delivery." My heart hammered in my chest. "How early?" "Potentially within the next week or two. I want to monitor you closely, and if things don't improve, we may need to perform a C-section." The word surgery sent a chill through me. Not just because of the risks involved, but because I realized, with startling clarity, that I would need help. Real help. The kind of help that involved asking people to put their own lives on hold for me. David immediately started making arrangements, calling his boss to discuss extended leave, reaching out to his sister in Denver who offered to fly in and help. When I called my parents that evening to explain the situation, the response was not what I had hoped for, but exactly what I should have expected. "Surgery?" My mother's voice carried that familiar tone of inconvenience. "Sarah, are you sure that's necessary? Doctors these days are so quick to jump to surgery." "Mom, the babies could die if we wait too long." "I just think you might be overreacting. You've always been a bit dramatic about medical issues." My father's voice joined the conversation. "What do you need from us, Sarah?" Finally, I thought. An offer to help. I was hoping maybe you could stay with us for a few days after the surgery. Just to help with the babies while I recover. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Sarah," my mother finally said, "you know your father and I aren't good with babies. And we have that concert series we've been planning to attend. The season tickets were very expensive." "Concert series?" I repeated, certain I'd misheard. "Yes, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. We've had these tickets for months. Surely David's family can help out." I felt something crack inside my chest, not physically, but emotionally. The final thread of hope that my parents might prioritize me, might choose me over their own convenience, snapped cleanly in two. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand." But I didn't understand. I never would. 2 days after that phone call, my water broke at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. David rushed me to Northwestern Memorial Hospital while I gripped the dashboard, trying to breathe through contractions that felt like my body was tearing itself apart. "It's too early," I kept saying. "They're too small." David's hand found mine as he navigated the empty Chicago streets. "They're going to be fine, Sarah. You're going to be fine." Dr. Peterson met us in the labor and delivery wing, her usual calm demeanor somehow both reassuring and terrifying. After a quick examination, she confirmed what I already knew. "We're doing this today," she said. "The babies need to come out now." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical personnel, consent forms, and the sharp smell of hospital disinfectant. David held my hand as they wheeled me into the operating room, his eyes wide with the same fear I felt but was trying to hide. "I love you," he whispered as the anesthesiologist prepared the epidural. "I love all three of you." I wanted to tell him I loved him too, but the medication was already taking effect, and the world began to feel distant and surreal. Emma Rose Martinezjan was born at 6:23 a.m., weighing 4 pounds, 3 ounces. Her brother, Lucas David Martinezjan, followed 2 minutes later at 4 pounds, 6 ounces. Both were immediately whisked away to the NICU, and I caught only the briefest glimpse of their tiny, red faces before they disappeared behind a wall of medical equipment and concerned voices. "They're breathing on their own," Dr. Peterson told me as she finished the surgery. That's the most important thing right now. They're fighters, Sarah. The recovery room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft whisper of air through the ventilation system. David sat beside my bed, showing me photos on his phone of our children, so small they looked almost translucent under the bright NICU lights, connected to more wires and tubes than seemed possible for such tiny bodies. They're perfect, I said, though I could barely keep my eyes open. They are, he agreed. And you did amazing. I drifted in and out of consciousness for the next several hours, vaguely aware of nurses checking my incision, adjusting 4 lines, and asking about my pain level. When I finally woke up fully, the sun was setting outside my window, painting the room in soft orange light. David was on the phone near the window, speaking in hushed tones. I caught fragments of conversation. Born this morning. Doing well. Yes, both of them. When he noticed I was awake, he quickly ended the call and returned to my bedside. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, I said honestly. But better. How are the babies? His face lit up. Emma's off the ventilator already. Lucas is still on oxygen support, but the doctors are optimistic. They said we can go see them as soon as you're ready to be moved. Who were you talking to? My sister. She's driving down from Milwaukee tonight to help out. He paused. And I called your parents. I felt my stomach clench. What did they say? David's expression grew carefully neutral. They're glad everyone is okay. Your mom said she'd try to visit this week if her schedule allows. If her schedule allows. The phrase hit me harder than the post-surgical pain. My twins were in the NICU, I was recovering from major surgery, and my mother would try to visit if her schedule allowed. Did you tell them I'll need help at home? David sat down in the chair beside my bed, reaching for my hand. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Your mom, she mentioned that they have those symphony tickets this weekend. She asked if we could manage without them for a few more days. I stared at the ceiling, focusing on the pattern of holes in the acoustic tiles. Symphony tickets. I told her we'd figure it out. My sister will stay as long as we need, and Mrs. Chen already offered to help however she can. Mrs. Chen. Our 78-year-old neighbor who barely knew us 6 months ago was more invested in our family's well-being than my own parents. I don't want to talk about them right now, I said. I want to see the babies. David helped me into a wheelchair, careful not to disturb the various tubes and monitors still attached to me. The trip to the NICU felt like traveling to another planet. Sterile corridors, locked doors requiring special access codes, and finally, a room filled with the soft hums and beeps of machines keeping the tiniest humans alive. Emma and Lucas lay in adjoining incubators, their skin almost translucent under the warming lights. Emma was indeed breathing on her own, her tiny chest rising and falling with determination that made my heart ache with pride and love. Lucas still had a small oxygen cannula, but his color was good, and he was moving his arms and legs in that jerky way of all newborns. You can touch them, the NICU nurse, Janet, said gently. Through the portals here. They need to feel you. I slipped my hands through the circular openings and gently stroked Emma's arm with one finger. Her skin was so soft it barely felt real. Lucas's hand instinctively grasped my finger when I touched his palm, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Hello, my loves, I whispered. Mommy's here. David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and then showed me the screen. It was from my mother. Heard the babies arrived safely. So happy for you. Looking forward to meeting them soon. The Mahler Symphony tonight was absolutely divine. Love you. I read the message twice, then looked back at my children, born 12 hours ago, fighting for their lives in a sterile hospital room while their grandmother attended a concert and texted about how divine it was. Sarah, David said softly. I'm fine. I lied. I'm just tired. But I wasn't fine. Something fundamental had shifted in those few hours since my children's birth. The last vestiges of hope I'd clung to about my parents' capacity for unconditional love were disintegrating like tissue paper in water. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed listening to the sounds of the maternity ward, other babies crying, nurses padding through hallways, new fathers making excited phone calls, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done waiting for my parents to choose me. Janet stopped by during her midnight rounds to update me on the baby's progress. Both were stable, Emma was nursing well, and Lucas would likely be off oxygen support within a day or two. "They're lucky to have such dedicated parents," she said. "I see a lot of families come through here, and not all of them handle the NICU experience well. You and your husband are naturals." "Thank you," I said. "It helps that we have good support." "Family nearby?" I thought about David's sister driving through the night to help us, about Mrs. Chen who had already texted 3 times asking if she could bring anything to the hospital, about my parents who were probably enjoying a late dinner after their symphony performance. "The family that matters," I said. Janet nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant. The next morning, Dr. Peterson cleared me for discharge. The babies would need to stay in the NICU for at least another week, maybe 2, but I could go home to rest and recover while making frequent visits for feeding and bonding. David's sister Monica arrived just as we were packing up to leave. She was everything my mother wasn't: warm, genuinely excited, and immediately focused on how she could help. "I brought meals for the next week," she announced, "and I'm completely at your disposal. Whatever you need, grocery runs, hospital visits, cleaning, crying shoulders, I'm here." As we prepared to leave the hospital, David's phone rang. It was my mother. "Let me talk to her," I said. David handed me the phone hesitantly. "Hi, Mom." "Sarah. Honey, how are you feeling? I'm so sorry I couldn't make it to the hospital yesterday. The concert ran so late, and you know how your father gets when his routine is disrupted." "I'm fine, Mom. We're heading home now." "Wonderful. And the babies?" "They're in the NICU. They'll be there for at least another week." "Oh dear, that sounds expensive. I hope your insurance covers it." I closed my eyes, counting to 10. "Mom, I could really use some help this week. David's going back to work tomorrow, and—" "Oh, sweetie, I wish I could, but we have the second concert tonight, and then your father has that golf tournament this weekend. Maybe next week." Next week. When the immediate crisis would be over, when the hardest part of recovery would be behind me, when I would no longer desperately need support. "Actually, Mom, don't worry about it. We have plenty of help." "Oh good. I knew you'd figure it out. You always do. You're so independent, Sarah. It's one of your best qualities." Independent. Another word for convenient. Another way of saying doesn't need us. "I have to go, Mom." "Of course. Kiss those babies for me. Can't wait to meet them." I hung up and handed the phone back to David. "Let's go home," I said. As we drove through the streets of Chicago, Monica chattering excitedly about her nephew and niece from the back seat, I realized something profound had happened during those 24 hours in the hospital. I had become a mother. But more than that, I had finally seen my own parents clearly, without the filter of hope or denial or desperate love. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to stop being their convenient, independent daughter who never asked for too much. It was time to build the family my children deserved, even if it didn't include the grandparents who shared their DNA. Our house felt simultaneously too quiet and too chaotic when we arrived home from the hospital. Monica had already transformed our kitchen into mission control, with labeled containers of meals, a detailed feeding schedule she'd created based on NICU guidelines, and a notebook where she'd written down every piece of advice the nurses had given us. "I hope you don't mind," she said, following my gaze around the kitchen. "I wanted to make sure everything was ready for when the babies come home." David hugged his sister tightly. "You're amazing, Monica. Thank you." I settled carefully onto our couch, every movement still sending sharp reminders of the surgery through my abdomen. The house smelled like the lavender cleaning supplies Monica had used, and soft afternoon light filtered through the windows, making everything feel peaceful and warm. It should have been perfect. It would have been perfect, if not for the hollow ache in my chest where my parents' support should have been. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Welcome home, dear. I made some of my special bone broth soup. It's in your refrigerator. Monica let me in earlier. Best thing for recovery after surgery. How are those precious babies?" I smiled despite everything and showed the message to David. "She came by while we were getting discharged," Monica explained. "Brought soup, some kind of herbal tea she swears by, and about 20 different baby blankets she knitted herself. She wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." Mrs. Chen, who had lost her own husband 2 years ago and whose children lived too far away to visit often, was treating our babies like the grandchildren she rarely got to see. The contrast with my own parents was almost painful. My phone rang again. This time it was my father. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Dad. Tired, sore, but okay." "Good, good. Listen, I wanted to call and let you know that your mother and I are planning to visit next weekend to meet the babies. Will they be home by then?" "I don't know yet. They might still be in the NICU." "Well, hopefully they'll be home. It would be good to see them in their own environment rather than that sterile hospital." I noticed he didn't ask how I was feeling, whether the surgery had gone well, or if there had been any complications. The focus was entirely on what would be most convenient for him and my mother. "Dad, if you want to meet them, they're at Northwestern Memorial. The NICU has visiting hours from..." "Oh, you know how your mother feels about hospitals. All those germs and sick people. It would be better to wait until they're home." "These are your grandchildren," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "They're not sick. They're just small and need a little extra care." Of course. We're very excited to meet them. Your mother's already started shopping for gifts." Shopping for gifts. Because buying things was easier than showing up, easier than rearranging plans, easier than prioritizing their daughter's needs over their own comfort. "I should go rest," I said. "The doctor said I need to take it easy for the next few weeks." "Absolutely. You take care of yourself. And remember, Sarah, we raised you to be strong and independent. You'll get through this just fine." After he hung up, I sat staring at the phone in my hand. "What did he say?" David asked, sitting down carefully beside me. "They want to visit next weekend, but only if the babies are home from the hospital. They don't want to go to the NICU." Monica looked up from the meal planning chart she was updating. "Are you serious? Their grandchildren are in the hospital and they won't visit." "They don't like hospitals," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Too many germs." "But..." Monica started to say something, then caught David's warning look and fell silent. I appreciated her restraint, but I was tired of protecting my parents from other people's judgment. They had made their choice. I wasn't going to make excuses for them anymore. That evening, we drove back to the hospital for feeding time. The NICU had a policy that parents could visit any time, but there were scheduled periods when we could hold the babies and help with their care. These moments had quickly become the highlight of my day, the few hours when I felt like a real mother instead of a surgery patient recovering at home. Emma was in my arms, taking her bottle with the determined focus of someone who understood that eating was the key to getting out of this place. Lucas was still working on coordinating his sucking and swallowing, but he was making progress every day. "They're getting stronger," Janet told me as I burped Emma against my shoulder. "Emma might be ready to go home by early next week if she keeps gaining weight like this." "What about Lucas?" "A few more days, probably. He's doing great. Just needs a little more time to mature." I looked down at my son, so small in my arms but fighting so hard to thrive. Take all the time you need, buddy, I whispered. We'll wait for you. When visiting hours ended, we drove home through the quiet Chicago suburbs. Monica had insisted on coming with us, and I was grateful for her presence. She asked thoughtful questions about the baby's progress and listened without judgment when I talked about how overwhelming everything felt. You know, she said as we pulled into our driveway, when Jake was born, Jake was her 4-year-old son, my mother-in-law drove 6 hours to stay with us for 2 weeks. She slept on our lumpy couch and got up for every 2 a.m. feeding so I could rest. I kept telling her she didn't have to, but she said that's what family does. I felt David tense beside me in the driver's seat. That sounds wonderful, I said. It was. I can't imagine going through those first few weeks without her. She paused. I'm sorry your parents aren't here, Sarah. You deserve better than that. The simple acknowledgement of what I was feeling, what I was losing, broke something open inside me. I started crying before we even got inside the house, big ugly sobs that hurt my incision and made breathing difficult. David and Monica helped me inside and settled me on the couch, Monica bringing tissues while David made tea with the special blend Mrs. Chen had left for me. I keep telling myself it doesn't matter, I said between sobs. That I don't need them. That I have David and you and Mrs. Chen and all these other people who care about us. But they're your parents, Monica said softly. Of course it matters. I thought maybe having grandchildren would change something. That they'd want to be involved, that they'd see this as important enough to put aside their concert schedule and their golf tournaments and whatever else is more important than their daughter and grandchildren. David sat down beside me and pulled me carefully against his side. Their choices don't reflect your worth, Sarah. They reflect their limitations. I know that intellectually, I said. But it still hurts. It should hurt, Monica said. That's how you know you're not like them. That's how you know you'll be a better parent than they ever were. We spent the rest of the evening making plans for the baby's homecoming. Monica would stay another week, maybe 2 if needed. Mrs. Chen had offered to help with grocery shopping and meal preparation. My friend Jessica from work was organizing a meal train with other colleagues. I was surrounded by love and support, but it was coming from everywhere except the place I'd expected it my entire life. That night, as I lay in bed listening to David's steady breathing beside me, I thought about the conversation I would need to have with my parents. Not the one where I begged them to care more or tried to convince them to prioritize their grandchildren. That conversation was pointless because their choices weren't about logic or persuasion, they were about fundamental differences in what we believed family meant. No, the conversation I needed to have was the one where I finally told them exactly what I thought of their choices. Where I stopped protecting them from the consequences of their selfishness. Where I stopped being the convenient, independent daughter who never asked for too much and started being the mother who would fight for her children's right to be valued and prioritized. It was a conversation that was long overdue. But first, I had to get my babies home safely. Everything else could wait. As I drifted off to sleep, Emma and Lucas's faces fresh in my memory, I realized that for the first time in my adult life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me and David. A family that operated on unconditional love instead of conditional approval. A home where children would never be called burdens, where help would be freely given and gratefully received, where showing up for each other wouldn't be contingent on convenience or perfect timing. My parents had taught me, through their absence, exactly what kind of grandmother I never wanted to be. It was a painful lesson, but perhaps a necessary one. Emma came home on a Tuesday morning exactly 9 days after she was born. She weighed 5 pounds, 2 ounces, and had passed all the tests the NICU required, maintaining her body temperature, feeding well, and breathing without assistance. Lucas would join her in a few more days. The car ride home was terrifying. Despite all the safety checks and the carefully installed car seat, I was convinced that our tiny daughter was too fragile for the outside world. David drove 5 miles under the speed limit while I sat in the back seat, one hand on Emma's chest to make sure she was still breathing. "She's okay, Sarah," Monica said from the front passenger seat. "Look at her. She's sleeping peacefully." Emma was indeed sleeping, her rosebud mouth slightly open, her tiny fists curled near her face. She looked perfect and impossibly small in her going-home outfit, a preemie-sized onesie that still seemed too big for her delicate frame. The house felt different with a baby in it, even one so small and quiet. Monica had prepared everything perfectly, the bassinet beside our bed, bottles and formula ready in the kitchen, a comfortable nursing chair in the corner of our bedroom with good lighting and a side table for water and snacks. "I can't believe she's actually here," I whispered as I settled Emma in my arms in the nursing chair. She latched immediately, her tiny hands kneading against my chest as she ate with the same determined focus she'd shown in the NICU. David sat on the edge of the bed, watching us with an expression of pure wonder. "She's perfect. She really is." My phone buzzed with notifications, text messages from friends checking in, pictures from colleagues who wanted to see the baby, and 3 missed calls from my mother. "I should probably call her back," I said reluctantly. "Do you want to?" David asked. It was such a simple question, but it stopped me cold. Did I want to call my mother back? For the first time in my life, I considered the possibility that I had a choice in the matter. "No," I said finally. "I don't want to. Not right now." David nodded. "Then don't." But an hour later, as Emma slept in her bassinet and I was trying to rest, my mother called again. This time she didn't hang up after it went to voicemail. "Sarah Marie Martinez, I know you're screening my calls. This is ridiculous. I'm your mother, and I have a right to know how my grandchildren are doing. Call me back immediately." The tone, imperious, demanding, focused entirely on her rights and feelings rather than my needs as a new mother recovering from surgery, crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. I called her back. "Mom." Finally. "Honestly, Sarah, it's like pulling teeth trying to get information from you. How are the babies? When are they coming home?" "Emma came home this morning. Lucas will be home in a few days." "Wonderful. Your father and I will drive over this weekend to meet them." "Actually, Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." Silence. I could practically hear her recalibrating, trying to figure out why her daughter was suddenly not falling in line with her plans. "What do you mean it's not a good idea?" "Sarah, we're their grandparents." "You're their grandparents who chose to go to a concert instead of helping when I had surgery, who haven't visited them once in the NICU, who won't even go to the hospital because you don't like germs." "That's not fair, Sarah. You know how I feel about hospitals. You know how I feel about my children." Another pause. Longer this time. "Sarah, I don't understand what's gotten into you. You're usually so reasonable." "Reasonable." I repeated the word, tasting it like something bitter. "You mean convenient. You mean I usually go along with whatever works best for you." "That's not." "Mom, do you have any idea how it felt to be in the hospital, having just given birth to your grandchildren, recovering from major surgery, and getting a text from you about how divine the symphony was?" I was sharing something I thought you'd enjoy hearing about. I was sharing the birth of your grandchildren, and you prioritized Mahler. David was watching me from across the room, his eyebrows raised in surprise at the sharpness in my voice. I'd never spoken to my mother like this, directly, without cushioning my words to protect her feelings. "Sarah, you're being unfair. Your father and I have been looking forward to meeting the babies. We've been very excited. Excited enough to rearrange a concert schedule? Excited enough to visit the NICU? Excited enough to help when your daughter needed you most. We offered to help. We said we'd visit this weekend. After everything important was over. After I'd already figured out how to manage without you. After other people stepped up to do what you should have done without being asked." I could hear my father's voice in the background, asking what was wrong, telling my mother to put the phone on speaker.
Sarah.
My father's voice came through the phone.
What's this about?
It's about the fact that Mrs. Chen, a woman who barely knew me 6 months ago, has done more to support our family than either of you. It's about David's sister driving through the night to help us while you worried about expensive symphony tickets. It's about realizing that I've spent my entire life trying to be the daughter who never inconveniences you, and I'm done.
Now hold on, my father said, his voice taking on the stern tone I remembered from childhood.
We've always supported you, Sarah.
No, Dad.
You've always supported the version of me that required nothing from you. The version that got good grades and stayed out of trouble and never needed emotional support or practical help or anything that might disrupt your routine.
That's not true.
When I was 12 and broke my arm at school, the first thing you said when you picked me up from the hospital wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "I hope this doesn't interfere with your piano recital."
Sarah, that was years ago.
When I was in college and called crying because I was overwhelmed and struggling with depression, Mom told me I needed to toughen up and not be so sensitive. When I graduated magna cum laude, you spent the whole celebration dinner talking about how proud you were that I'd never been a burden to you financially. Emma stirred in her bassinet, making the soft mewling sounds that meant she was waking up. I lowered my voice, but I didn't stop talking. Do you know what word I've heard more than any other in my life?
Burden.
Don't be a burden, Sarah. We can't afford burdens. Good children aren't burdens.
Well, guess what?
I have 2 children now who will never ever hear that word applied to them. Not from me, not from anyone I allow in their lives. Sarah, my mother's voice was strained now, higher pitched.
You're overreacting. We love you.
We love the babies.
Love isn't a feeling, Mom.
It's a choice you make every day. It's showing up when showing up is hard. It's prioritizing the people who matter over the things that are convenient. It's being willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of someone else's well-being. Emma was definitely awake now, her cries soft but insistent. I stood carefully and lifted her from the bassinet, settling her against my chest.
I have to go, I said. Emma needs to eat.